Ciak, buona la 102esima. Hi, welcome back. Yeah, so as you could tell, I took kind of a long break from this channel. It was really needed because I was going through a rough time, but now I'm back. And I am back with a bang because I'm back with my favorite books of 2020 as I had promised. So I wanted to do some kind of a twist on this concept of a video. So I wanted to do kind of like a prize show, like a TV show with prizes. So I created some categories and I'm going to go through them, and for every category I'm going to have one or sometimes two books, and those are the best books that I've read last year. So the first category that I created is best manga, and this will come as a surprise to no one because I've talked about these mangas in every video that I made since I've read them. I have a reading vlog in which I read these mangas. I'm going to look it up here. And the manga in question is Country Diaries, both volume 1 and 2 by Aya Isno. These mangas talk about a very young professor that teaches at Tokyo University, and he has an epiphany and he wants to move to the countryside and live a simpler life, tending to the plants and his garden. So he moves to the countryside, but he doesn't know anything about how to live there, like in actuality what you have to do, how do you grow a garden for yourself. And so it is so sweet, so wholesome. All the people in the tiny village that he moves to really help him, and he befriends a carpenter that fixes his new house, and they become like super close friends. It is peak wholesomeness. So the second category is best comic / graphic novel, and I wanted to separate it from the best manga because I think those are two very different art forms, and I should differentiate between comic and graphic novel, but in my case it was very difficult to decide whichever it was. So the winner for this category is Henshin by Ken Nimura. You probably know this author for his other comic graphic novel I Kill Giants. So this is a collection of short stories which I often hate, but if it is in like comics or graphic novels or mangas, I tend to appreciate more than in prose form. So the stories are very different. Some of them have some magical aspect to them. There's like a cat who is invisible, if I recall correct. And then there is a very thrilling story about an uncle and his nephew going to rob a bank. It was so random, but it was so funny, and the art style was like fantastic, so it wins the category. So the next category I made thinking there would be so many contenders, but apparently there was not. Most hilarious read of the year. And it was actually really easy to decide because there was actually only one comic that really made me laugh out loud, rolling, etc. But it wasn't a favorite. It was a 3-star, which is okay, and I'm going to explain why it is a 3-star because it's nothing bad, and it's Batman and Joker Switch. I had a resurgence of all my past passions during the first quarantine, and that included Star Trek, as you could see from all of my videos, and Batman. So I read a ton of old Batman comics. Batman and Joker Switch is a very short, super short comic about Batman and Joker gets experimented on by a crazy scientist that switches his face so his mouth is on his neck, and he goes totally insane. And so he begins an investigation all by himself, trying to find this scientist and to understand what is going on. And he thinks like, oh, to investigate, I must become the best investigator in the world, who is Batman. And so he thinks like, for today, I'm going to be Batman. And so he thinks to himself like Batman, like these brooding superheroes who dress like a bat, and it's so funny. The only problem is that it was too short. The ending was so abrupt and it wrapped up too quickly. If it had had like 50 pages more, it would have been such perfection because it was hilarious. So this is for best romance, and the best romance that I read was discovered totally at random. I bought this ebook like totally at random, and it's Then Sinister by KJ Charles. So I've already talked about this book, I think, but to recap, it is a Regency era romance between kind of like a duke figure, or I don't remember his title, but he had a lot of money, but he has the reputation of being kind of like a womanizer, even though he's pretty gay, but nobody knows it. And so he charms the new kid in town that comes back after the death of his parents. And so the protagonist gets wooed by this wonderful man who is actually not a womanizer at all, and he's not scary, he's super sweet and super understanding of his naivety. And the protagonist also has a sister who writes like gothic horror novels. I loved her so freaking much. I love the sister so much. I was hoping for a book all about her because she gave me such Suffolk vibes, but it was just so perfect. And the romance was slow when it had to be and a little faster when it had to be, and they talked to each other with there was no miscommunication that was like super annoying. They really talked through their feelings, which was wonderful to see. How am I gonna describe this book to you? It's not even a book. What is it? I don't know. So, for the spaciest sci-fi, the best sci-fi novel slash whatever this is that I read last year. So I went on a bit of a rabbit hole on Twitter, and I found out that there is this thing that is like a multimedia hypertext story. Let's call it like that. And it's 76. What football will look like in the future. I'm going to put it right here and link it down there because it's free to read. You just have to go to that website and then just thank me later, because it's so weird to describe, but we are in the year 1776 on Earth, kind of. We are in space actually, but we are observing Earth, where humanity is now immortal. There are machines that keep humans from hurting each other, and we have just stopped dying to find a cure for kind of like boredom and existential crisis. Humans have developed these football games that can go for like miles and miles, and it can be like an international football game, and the fields are like miles long, and it can go for like 100 years, 1,000 years. And so there are 3 space probes that actually exist. One is going to be launched, I think, in 2025, and the other 2 are already in space. They are, I think, dead by now, but they have gained sentience, so they can talk to each other, and they observe these football games and then talk about humanity, so what being a human is really like, about immortality. If you are a child of the internet, if you grew up on the internet, I think you really appreciate what this story does. Also because it integrates hypertext, images, videos like YouTube videos, and GIFs or GIFs, I don't know which one it's the right one, to create this narrative, and it feels like you're watching an interactive movie, which was so great. The next category is best gals and pals, so the best friendship, so the friendship that made me the happiest to read about. And it's another manga. I've already talked about this manga a lot, but this is Strange by Yuriko Tsuyuki. So let me preface, another short story collection. 2020 was the year of short story collection only in illustrated form. So you follow the budding friendship between, in each and every story, there are 2 very different people meeting in unlikely places and with unlikely circumstances, and they develop a super cute and wholesome and healthy friendship. The best one, I think, was the first one and the one that inspired the cover. So there is this kid who is very lost. He doesn't know what to do with his future, and he has to take, I think, university exams. He meets a drag queen, and the drag queen also doesn't know what to do with their future. So it was wholesome, and the representation of this drag queen wasn't a stereotypical one that you usually find in mangas, which was so refreshing. And I think this was just so cute and the perfect mood lifter for 2020. This is going to be very hard to describe, but the next category is weirdest book, and I have a tie. So let's talk about briefly the first contender and the one that is easier to describe, even though still pretty freaking weird. And it's Bunny by Mona Awad. I said the easiest, but this is actually really hard to describe. There is this writing program, this elitist writing program, and everybody wants to get in there. And the protagonist gets a scholarship for this writing program, and she finds herself surrounded by these girls, these rich, stereotypically mean girls that you find in movies. And at first she really hates them. She hates the way they write, the way they're so pretentious in them giving compliments only to each other and hating her. But then she gets sucked into their circle, and from then on it's a fever dream. I don't want to spoil anything about this book. I don't want to describe anything because you have to experience it. Let's just say it's not going the way that you think it's gonna go. The ending is where I think things wrapped up in a way that I didn't necessarily nor dislike nor liked. It's just the way that things went, which is why this wasn't a 5 stars. This was more of a 4.5 stars, but still pretty freaking weird. And then I also have a vlog in which I film myself experiencing this book, because you don't read it, you experience it. The book is Vita Nostra. In the original title is Metamorphosis, I think, Metamorphosis, yeah. Let's talk about it. Because what I got from this book is a lot of philosophy. So what I got is that this is not hyperbole, but it perfectly describes the path that you have to take, and the path they all philosophers described as the path you have to take to truly understand what life is and to come to a sort of enlightenment, is what the protagonist walks in this book. So the story is very weird to describe, because there is this little girl that suddenly experiences very weird occurrences, and she meets this very scary man that tells her, you have to do this list of things and I'm going to reward you with a coin, and if you don't do that, bad things are going to happen. And bad things happen because she refuses at first. And then she does all the list of things, she's desperate, and she at the end gets taken to a very weird university, and she has to lie to her parents to go there, but she feels like if bad things are going to happen when she doesn't listen to this man, then not going to university will cause the death of somebody. So she goes there, and she begins this path of her understanding who she really is, what she really is, and trying to understand the world as you never imagined it to be. Hearing people's thoughts on this book is such a fun time. So please pick up this book and then let me know. So for the most magical fantasy, and here I'm going to put kind of a hybrid, because it's kind of a sci-fi fantasy as it was described to me on book Twitter, even though I thought it was just a fantasy, but I can understand why it has some sci-fi element. And it's the 5th season. I have here the 2nd book in the series, The Obelisk Gate. I still haven't read it, but it's still here. So you follow 3 women in 3 different perspectives. So it's the 2nd a third and a first perspective for each of these women, and you follow them on this earth that is plagued by natural disasters. So there are super intense earthquakes that causes tsunamis, and people don't know what to do. But there are these people who can control the minerals and the earth beneath their feet. And they're not seen as powerful beings to worship. They're seen as outcasts. They're seen as dangerous. And so most of the time, children who are even thought to be this kind of people, they get killed in their youth. And only sometimes they get rescued by this kind of like an academy to train them to be kind of slaves of the state. And so you follow these three very powerful women, and there's this kind of big twist in which their stories come together, and it was so powerful to read. The writing was so different from each perspective, but so down to earth, so nitty and gritty, and I loved it. And I think this is one of the series that is really worth the hype. And N.K. Jemisin, chef's kiss. Around Halloween, I decided to read a lot of Batman comics set on a spookier atmosphere. So the category is spookiest book, or the book that scared me the most. And it's actually a comic / graphic novel, and it is going to be another Batman story. I'm sorry, but it's Batman Arkham Asylum, a serious house on a serious earth, which is a mouthful to say. Another fever dream of a book, because you follow Batman who, for the 20th times, has to enter Arkham Asylum because the inmates have escaped from their cells and have taken some hostages. So he enters Arkham Asylum, and from there is a descent into hell. There are some recurring powerful villains that you may recognize, like the most important one is the Joker, and then there is like Poison Ivy and all sorts of old Batman villains, and they are so deformed and so different, and so like the drawings are so scary, and it's almost not legible because the writing is different from every character, and it's so hard to read from the Joker's dialogues. While this was utterly terrifying because the drawings were terrifying, this was one of the first instances in which I found mentions of the Joker being gay. And so I fell into this rabbit hole again on queer villains in comics and cartoons. So basically, the Joker was created to be queer, was created to be gay, because the only way in which you could represent LGBTQIA+ people was to make them the villain at a time. And so he was thoroughly homosexual at the beginning of the Batman comics when he first was introduced. And then all of it was completely erased. All of that part of his identity, the wacky costumes, him walking in heels and wearing sort of more feminine makeup and hanging out with men, was kind of erased from existence. And this is one of the first few instances in modern comics in which he like flirts with men and he's seen like with men. So I was very intrigued, that's what it was, and also thoroughly spooked. So the next category is most surprising 5-star, and this is going to be Hotel Silence by Audur Ava Olafdottir. So I picked up this book 6 years ago in a random bookshop, and it's the English version, and I only picked it up because the cover intrigued me, and I thought it was going to be kind of a psychological thriller or like a horror because of the cover. And apparently it's not. It's a novel about grief. Our protagonist at the beginning of the novel gets dumped by his wife, and she tells him, "I never loved you. The child that we have, it's not yours. I had sex with another man before you and never told you." And so he finds out his daughter is not his biological daughter, even though he loves her so much, and his daughter loves him a lot. And so he finds himself completely alone in his house. And so he decides to end his life. But he doesn't want his daughter to find his corpse. So he decides to book a holiday in this Hotel Silence, which is located in this not nomadic country that has just gone through war. So everything is completely in ruins. There's almost no electricity in the houses and running water, and you can't stray off the path because there are landmines, so you could get yourself killed. And so he decides to take residence there, and he befriends the people in this town. And these people discover that he is a carpenter and a handyman, and so they begin to ask him to repair their houses and their radiators and stuff like that. And through this process, he begins to truly understand himself. And throughout this process, he finds meaning in his life and his work. And he says that for the first time, he feels like his body is truly his body and that he's doing something that is meaningful. I'm not gonna lie, I cried thoroughly throughout this book, because even though it has a lot of purple prose in the dialogues, and you could think like people don't talk like this, but it's consistent throughout the novel, so it's kind of like a stylistic choice, so I was kind of okay with it. And some of the things that are said about war, about grief, about the loss of someone were so powerful and hit so close to home. So this was an instant 5 stars. I constantly think about this book. The next category, this is going to be very fun to explain. It's the book that made me cry the most. So with Hotel Silence, I cried a lot, but not it was in a liberating way, because at the end we find happiness. With this book, no happiness involved. It was sadness from beginning to end, sadness and anger and grief, and just like I felt awful after finishing this book and after crying, and it was awful. It was an awful reading experience, but I loved it. And this is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, in Italian Una vita come tante. I have a full blog in which I read this and cry a ton, so I'm going to link it up here. This book destroyed me, and not in a good way. It's not when you say like, haha, this book was like cry-worthy and sad and you can talk about it with your friends. No, this is not a book that I recommend. I never recommend this. If you have not thoroughly read the trigger warnings, because there are a lot and they are described in graphic details, this is not a happy story. This is not a story that I'd ever reread, but there are quotes that are ingrained in my brain. And also this book is the reason I made a wonderful friend, so the memories are still fond. The week that I took out of my life to read this, I was empty. I was completely empty. So, the last category, I promised my mom I was going to call it Topo Awards, because our dog's name is Toby, while we call it Topo, which means little mouse. So the Topo Award, the best books, because there are 2 that I read last year. I've already mentioned both of them, and those are the books that make me cry, so only sad books in that category. So it's a tie between Hotel Silence and A Little Life. I cannot choose between this because this is more meaningful to me because of external circumstances, 1, and 2, because some of the description of loneliness that I found in this book resonated with me in a way that I didn't think could be true. I cannot not think about this book. You never see in novels countries that have just gone through war but are still like wounded from it, and you can see the open wounds in the streets and in the houses and in the people. And also the description of grief that the protagonists go through was terrifying to read about, because grief can hit close to home for anybody. I cried. This is the category. I cried. Therefore, best books. You've reached the end of the video, so if you could please go into the description and check out. There are some very important links down there, especially for people in need during these 2 long years of a global pandemic, so please check them out. Also, socials, I have them. I'm going to link it down below. If you want to connect with me, I'm always on Twitter. I always respond. I also have a Goodreads if you want to see what I'm reading, and also an Amazon wish list. You don't have to get me anything, but if you want to see what I will buy in the future and probably will read, that's a list. Okay, so I hope, again, that you have fun during my video, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!